My name is Rene Enriquez. We're going to be talking about American Me today. I know a lot of people have previously done recordings on this, added their opinions about it. There's been video after video created ad nauseum. But I wanted to clarify some of the myths and misconceptions about the movie, because it's just, some of the stuff out there is just straight falsehood. But I just got finished watching it again for the 10th time. I remember this movie came out while I was in the county jail. They were developing it. And actually they had just finished shooting, and I think they were in the editing and production phase. And I had contacted Paramount Studios. I had done a little research. I had heard through the grapevine that it was being produced, and the leading actor was Edward James Olmos. And a little known fact is that there was a family rumor that went around for years that Edward James Olmos was our cousin. I never believed that. Some of the family members did, but I had never seen him at a family function, which we didn't have many. We had a small family. And I just never said that he was a relative of mine. I believe it's just fanciful thinking by relatives because of our middle name. But I contacted Paramount Studios, just called in like a regular Joe, and asked to speak to Mr. Olmos. And I got the runaround. I talked to numerous people at the front desk and finally got a hold of a co-producer or an actor in the movie by the name of Danny Haro, Haro. And he asked me to write a letter to Mr. Olmos requesting a copy of the script, because that's what I was after, a copy of the script. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to see the movie, so I wanted to read it. I did. I wrote a letter. He gave me Mr. Olmos' address, and I wrote him a letter, a personalized letter. And I requested a copy of the script. I let him know who I was. I didn't say I was boxer from the Mexican Mafia, which I was at the time. And I got a response back in the mail, which is, I received about a week later, a big 8x10 envelope from Paramount Studios. And I thought, oh yeah, he came through. He gave me a copy of the script. I opened it up, and it's a production packet. It's like for a fan or somebody who's going to write about the movie and advertising or something. It was a big 8x10 glossy. The picture you often see of all the guys standing, JD, Emundo, and Santana, the whole group standing in front of Folsom. I think it's 2 Block that they're standing in front of. They sent me that picture, and then they sent me a headshot of Edward James Olmos in his prison blues, and a brief description of the movie, and a little small postcard, something like that. I remember there's a bunch of stuff in there, and I was just like, I didn't want this. So I called back this Danny Haro, and I told him, I said, I did not receive a copy of the script, and I received a production packet, and that's not what I was after. And I let him know in uncertain terms, like, I'm not a fan, I'm not an aficionado. I wanted to receive a copy of the script because I heard about some unsavory parts in the movie and how certain people were being depicted. But by no means was it a threat. I went about it in the normal way, and lo and behold, that letter came out in Los Angeles Times, that it was a thinly veiled threat. And that was the ending I put. I remember it specifically because I wanted it to sound innocuous. I didn't want it to sound nefarious or threatening or hostile in any way. So I wrote at the end, I wish you health, happiness, and box office success. And it was true. It was true. I didn't want the guy's movie to flop. I particularly liked the movie. Certain parts I didn't like, but I liked the movie. I think it appealed to all Mexican Mafia members at the time. The Mexican Mafia had arrived. That's what the movie signified. The Mexican Mafia made the big screen. It was world news now. And that was something that kindled everybody's ego. And I don't think there was anybody that would have been opposed to a movie or major coverage like that on the organization, except for the really conservative members, that there were a couple of them. But my letter was construed as a threat to Mr. Olmos. And it wasn't intended that way. And it wasn't written that way, and it was never meant that way. But certainly there were threats against him. I understand that. There was individuals who would have killed him had they had the opportunity. But I think more importantly, Mr. Olmos was seen as a financial opportunity. I think the whole being put on the lista thing was more of an incentive for him to pay rather than a sincere effort to have him killed. I don't think he was ever in danger. Not one day of his life was he in danger by the Mexican Mafia. And I know a lot of people put that in his head, that he was, and that he had to run, that he had to hire a guard, that he had to apply for a concealed weapons permit in California. A lot of people blew smoke up his ass. Now, would the mafia have killed him? I'm certain that if he was walking around in a hood that was loyal to the organization with a placard above his head that says, I'm Edward Olmos and I disrespected the organization, yeah, then somebody might have took a pot shot at him. If he was available on a regular basis, maybe they would have took a shot at him if he refused to pay. But it's my understanding that he paid a good lump of money to certain members that had made the request. And I think the threat went away right there. He bought his way out, just like it's done on general population yards now and other locations where people can buy their way out of jams for a specific period of time with that specific member. He bought his way out of a jam with these specific members. And the threat therein died. That's just a reality. Edward James Olmos can go to any Hollywood premiere. He can go stick his hands in cement. He can go walk Hollywood Boulevard. He could live his life in Southern California, which I'm sure he's doing sometime in his everyday life. He's walking and functioning as a normal individual. So I think in retrospect, if he looks back at it, and all the pundits and the critics and the individuals who said he was threatened and the mafia never forgets and it never sleeps and they'll get you no matter what, he'll look back at that as a bunch of poppycock, which it was. It was an opportunity to extort Edward James Olmos. He's never confirmed nor denied, to the best of my knowledge, that he was extorted by the organization. It's simply a topic he won't discuss. Wisely, give the man credit. He took a piece of art and he took some artistic liberty with the creation of that movie, which offended some people. It got some people pissed off. And we're talking about specific scenes like Santana in Juvenile Hall, which didn't happen. If that had been known to the organization, the guy wouldn't even have been made. It's true that probably 50% of the individuals in prison have had some sort of experience with being sexually abused. But nobody talks about that. Nobody knows about that. That's a personal burden that each individual, which I'm sure there's other individuals in the organization that have been sexually abused, won't speak of. It's just not spoken of. And for Edward James Olmos to put it on the big screen and discuss it in that manner and portray it in that manner, that was what really pissed off the organization. Everything else, there was a lot of artistic liberty taken in the war with the BGF. How when they're passing the wire, it's actually called passing the line, not passing the wire. In prison, you create something called a fish line and you throw it down the tier. But in situations like that, you can pass it cell by cell. Or it's an open bar front. And it's a pretty simple distribution process, that line, throwing the line. So when the BGF member took some of the dope out and cut it, that was a falsehood. And the murder of the individual BGF member by torching him in his cell, that was a falsehood. And the meeting on the tier with Doc Holliday, that was a falsehood. I could nitpick on some of the creation and production, like attire, and I've seen a couple of scenes, and if you've been to prison, certain things like the back of your hand. As soon as you look up at the tower, when they're in Folsom State Prison, there is a gunner, and he's holding a Heckler Koch 9mm. These were brought in the 80s because the 223, the Ruger Mini 223, was hitting people, going through them and hitting innocent bystanders. So they implemented this new policy where they redistributed this HK assault rifle with laser rounds to ensure that innocent people weren't hit by rounds from the 223 that were passing through the intended target and killing other people. So I saw that. I said, those HKs weren't around in that era, or what they're trying to depict. Just a slight, maybe oversight by the producers of the movie. Some of the apparel, people wearing tight khakis, everybody dressed the same in the beginning of the movie, where Mundo, JD, and Santana were walking down the street. I mean, nobody would be caught dead, not in my era, wearing tight khakis. That was for girls. Girls wore tight khakis. That was accepted by women. I mean, it was expected, but even then, some of the homegirls wore baggy clothes. They were always baggy clothes. But I don't want to nitpick at that. I couldn't have done a better job. So far be it from me to critique some of the things I saw. I'm really here to dispel those myths, those continuously perpetuating myths. And I hear it all the time, that 10 people were killed. 10 people were killed. And that is just not the case. 10 people were killed over the creation of American Me, and that's just not true. And I'm here to tell you that I was there at the time. I was involved in the organization at the time, and there were only 3 people killed. I have direct knowledge of these 3 individuals, but they weren't even killed because they participated in the movie. That's just not the case. Let's start off first with Charlie Bragz Enriquez. Charlie Bragz Enriquez was living in the hazard projects, and for years they had been talking about killing Charlie Bragz Enriquez. In fact, I remember paroling in '88, and I met with Manuel Luna, who would later become a victim of the Mexican Mafia, and Raymond Shashrayak, and they were talking about Charlie Brown. We used to call him CB. And they were talking about CB, and they were saying he's got to go. In a flippant, offhanded way. It wasn't like, hey, we got to whack this guy tomorrow. It was, yeah, that guy's dead weight, and he's good for nothing, and he's an embarrassment. And Charlie Bragz Enriquez was an embarrassing sight for a Mexican Mafia member. Charlie Bragz Enriquez was living on the street. He was stealing. In fact, he stole a case of bananas from the corner liquor store right across there from the Ramona Gardens projects, the hazard projects. And he was seen running down the street with these bananas. This was told to me by an individual who witnessed it. In fact, Manuel Luna told me about it and said the guy was embarrassing, that he was stealing car batteries out of cars and going and selling them to get his daily fix for heroin. I remember myself and Jaco Padilla would often go to the Ramona Gardens projects and give him heroin so he wouldn't be sick and give him cash. In one instance, Charlie Bragz Enriquez invited me to his house. It was late at night. I was carrying a gun, and so was Jaco Padilla. So I put him in my car. We drive down to this alley, which is adjacent 2 streets over from the projects. And it's dark. It's like a classic scene for a hit in Mob. You go down a dark alley, and they invite you into a dark house, and that's exactly what he did to me. He invited me into a darkened garage area. And I remember I was so nervous because here is a Mexican Mafia member inviting me into a darkened garage, and I think he's going to clip me. As he's fumbling around in the dark, I'm pulling out a .357 that I'm carrying, and I'm going to shoot him because I was that afraid. But he lights a candle on top of a big spool that served as a table, the spools that carry copper cable, and there's 2 milk crates on either side and a mattress on the floor. It's an abandoned house. He invited me. This is where he was living with his girlfriend. I don't think he realized how close he came to getting shot because he made me feel hinky about taking me into a darkened room. And Jaco felt the same way because Jaco was strapped too. We were going to kill this guy. In fact, when I was there, I was going to shoot them both because I thought they were going to both kill me. But before he could turn around, I tucked the gun back in my waistband, pulled my shirt over, and I just felt like this guy is living the lowest of the low. He's a street person. And I had taken Charlie Bragz Enriquez on a couple of robberies with me. I tried to get him up on his feet. I gave him money. I gave him dope. Not much. I was struggling myself. I had just gotten out of prison. I was out days, and I was already robbing and hustling. I had a car. I had all that stuff. But Charlie Bragz Enriquez was killed because he was dead weight. Not because he became a technical advisor and accepted a pair of Levi's and a pair of tennis shoes from Edward Olmos. That was not the reason he was killed. That may have been used as a vehicle to get to his murder. Could have added and served as a catalyst. But he certainly wasn't killed because he was involved in the movie. Now there's Ana Lisara. Or Lisarga. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, and I apologize to the family if I am. That was another issue that had existed years before Ana Lisarga had participated in the movie. In fact, she was a youth gang counselor for Youth Gang Services, which was an organization that existed. I'm not even sure if it's still in existence or if it's now defunct. But she was a counselor, and she had her own car. She would drive around the neighborhood, and it was believed that she was cooperating with law enforcement. She would tell law enforcement what was happening with the gang. So she had a rat jacket for years. This is fact. This is well known. And I don't say that to cast a disparaging image on This Lisara guy, I truly feel empathy for the family and their loss, and I'd like to express my condolences to each of the victims that lost their lives in this. I'm certainly not trying to talk bad about any of the victims. I'm just stating the facts, and that's that Ms. Lisara had issues, and those issues existed long before her participation in the production of this movie. So when she did participate, again, it was used as a catalyst rather than the core issue. Relatively unimportant in terms of why they killed her participation in the movie. It was believed that she was an informant and that she was informing with the Sheriff's Department and LAPD as a result of her work with the gang services. And the last individual was Manuel Luna. Manuel Luna was a member in good standing. They used to call him the Godfather of Hazard, right? Everybody called him the Godfather there. They're homeboys. For the guys from Hazard Grande. And he was well respected as a carnal. In fact, he was one of the guys I considered my friends. And I didn't have many friends in the organization. But Rocky was one of them. I never called him Rocky either. I called him Manuel. I had been to his house on numerous occasions. I remember the first time I got out, he came to my house and we had a barbecue there. Me, him, and a couple other carnales had a barbecue at my house. They met my family. They knew my kids. So I knew Manuel well. But rather than his participation in the movie being the core cause of his death, it was used again as the catalyst. The movie was used as a vehicle to get to that point. Like if you see it that way, right? And in the organization, it doesn't take much to get put on the lista. And they can use anything and everything, and they do, to bring about your demise. And this was used to bring about Rocky's demise. But the thing for Rocky was that he had become a crackhead. He was using crack, and he had lost face in the organization. He had lost face to the homeboys, and David Gallardo had seen this as an opportunity. David Gallardo was really trigger happy. He was a guy that just wanted to kill people, and he believed that would establish his position in the organization. And I've often said that violence is a status mobility system in the organization. It's the way people move up in their social strata. And David obviously believed this to be the only way to get on top of the organization. It's a way to get recognized. It's a way to gain recognition, but it won't keep you floating on top. You need socio-political skills to remain on top. You need to have the ability to network to stay on top. And he clearly didn't have those because he got whacked as soon as he got to Marion. He was a loudmouth, he was a braggart, and he got whacked. And I think there was some resentment among some of the members, Black Dan, Raymond Wedoshai Shrayak, Black Dan Barella from White Fence, that truly loved Manuel, and they were resentful that he killed him. They had him killed, actually. It was actually Pee-wee Aguirre, Alex Aguirre, that killed Manuel Luna. But it was brought about by David Gallardo, Smilon from Hazard, because Smilon, that ego, wanted to be the guy in Hazard. There was a lot done there in that area that was directly linked to the movie, but had really nothing to do with the movie. So I've often heard people say that they blame Edward Olmos. He's responsible for many deaths. I've heard actors say this. I've heard activists say this. I've heard gangsters say this, but it's just not the truth. He can sleep with a clean conscience. I think he'd be more precautious in dealing with some of these topics. I think the organization would have been completely okay with it had they not shown that sodomy scene of Santana, who was supposed to be Cheyenne Cadena. Cheyenne Cadena was a well-known Mexican Mafia member that was ultimately murdered in Chino State Prison. And I think that was a bit offensive. The last part of the movie where Cheyenne was murdered by his own members, it was depicted that they killed him on the tier and threw him off the tier, when in fact he was killed by the Nuestra Familia. And then that was what you would consider today to be an activist. And he believed in his cause, about unity and peace among the organizations. The Chicanos shouldn't be killing Chicanos. And I hate that word because I believe it's an ethnic label. Mexicanos is what I believe we are. But when they depicted the organization killing him, when in fact it was the Nuestra Familia killing him, that was also offensive. Those are the only two real scenes that offended the organization. And I think that another scene was the BGF, where the BGF was utilized by Stagnelli to go and take out Mexican Mafia members in dope houses. That never happened. That showdown on the yard with the BG and the cell block with between Doc Holliday and Santana. That never happened. It just wouldn't. In prison, it wouldn't stand. There would have been shots fired. People would have been taken out by the guards immediately if that would have been happening. It's just, if you've been to prison, it's not going to happen. And most importantly, the scene with Stagnelli's son in prison, that didn't happen. Now, the only Italian mobster ever killed in Folsom State Prison by the Mexican Mafia was Jimmy Coppola. Jimmy Coppola was an Italian guy. He was mobbed up with the LA mob, and he owed a Mexican Mafia member a small, minute amount of money for dope. The Mexican Mafia member, who is now defected, I won't even name him, had him killed. In fact, he was murdered by being stabbed. And that's the only relation to the Italian mob that shows in the movie. I think they took quite a bit of artistic liberty, saying that the guy was a mobster's son and they stuck a knife up his rear end. I think that was a bit much. But the reality is nobody lost their lives over this movie. It could have been used as a part of the politicking process. So I just wanted to dispel that. I wanted people to hear it from a person who knew, a person who was involved with the organization at the time. And I've always wanted to say this. I think I've said it a couple times in past interviews and some of the work that I've done in the past. But I think it's important that people know the truth, rather than perpetuate this falsehood and this myth that's going around this movie, this swirls around it. Set the record straight. It's pretty simple to do. And I hope that I've done that for you today. We'll be talking on other issues. I look forward to speaking with you in the future. Hope I could send out a positive message to you. I encourage you all to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that bell notification. Leave a comment too. We depend on you guys to make this channel grow, and we need you. So with that said, peace out, folks. That's my take on American Me. You'll be hearing more from me in the future. I'm out.